History in the United States as former President Donald Trump is arrested for the fourth time. Plus, his Republican rivals take to the debate stage for the first time in the race for the White House. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Calebs. I'm sitting in for Anand Naidu, and you are watching The Heat. Welcome. It has literally become a snapshot in history. A defiant-looking Donald Trump, once one of the most powerful leaders in the world, posing for his mugshot following his latest arrest and booking, this time on 13 charges stemming from efforts to reverse the state of Georgia's 2020 election results. Opponents argue it is further proof that he is unfit for office. Trump and his allies say he is the victim of a rigged justice system, and it's an effort to keep him from winning the next presidential election. There is a lot to unfold, a lot to talk about looking forward on the 2024 election, and of course, Donald Trump. Let's get right to our panel. Brice is a conservative columnist and a radio talk show host. Also joining us, Rena Shah. She is a political analyst and commentator. And we have Gerald Griggs. He is a civil rights attorney and president of the NAACP in the state of Georgia. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us firstly. But Gerald, I'd like to begin with you. It has been a very, very active couple of weeks down in the state of Georgia, where Donald Trump turned himself in, along with his 18 co-defendants in this issue, to face racketeering charges known as RICO. Now, let's talk about RICO, what this actually means. This is where a group works as an entity, works as an organization, something often that we refer to in prosecuting the mafia or mob trials. So break it down for us. What is RICO, and what about these charges? Why is it being used right now?
Well, in Georgia, the RICO Act is a racketeering and enterprise and criminal enterprise act. And basically, it's used to show when there is an organization that's being used for a criminal purpose to violate the law. And in this particular case, the allegation is an attempt to subvert Georgia's election through a conspiracy using a system of politics as well as organized interference. And so in this particular case, the law is being used to show that there was subversion of the Georgia elections through the attempt to subvert the will of the people by hiring fake electors and by making sure that the actual vote count was not counted. So the prosecutor, Fonnie Willis, is trying to use this particular statute as well as others to show there was an intent to subvert the will of the people here in the state of Georgia.
Gerald, I'd also like to follow up on this, talking about Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. He is already making an effort to have his case move from state court into federal court. What is the purpose of that? What is the legal argument? And how likely do you think this is going to happen?
Well, former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is arguing that everything that he did in this particular case was consistent with his duties as the Chief of Staff, setting up the meetings, setting up the phone calls, and trying to make sure that the election went the way that they wanted it to go. And so he's saying in his capacity as a federal officer, he's immune from state prosecution in the state of Georgia, and it should be in the federal court. And it's a novel argument with regard to an attempt to subvert the election. I don't think anything was within his scope of his duties in that. So the judge will hear those arguments on Monday. I think that it will not be successful, and this case will be held in state court. But even if he is successful, all it does is change the venue from state court to federal court. It would be the same prosecutors, it'd be the same law. It would just be a heightened, widened jury pool. So instead of drawing from Fulton County, it would draw from the Northern District of Georgia, which would be more favorable considering the politics in Fulton County,
right,
which is an overwhelmingly Democratic county where most of North Georgia is mixed.
I'd also like to bring in our fourth guest, Frank Cesner. He is a former CNN Washington bureau chief, and he is currently the director of initiatives at George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs. Frank, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for taking time to chat with us.
Great to see you.
I'd like to talk to you about Trump being arrested, being at the Atlanta jail in Fulton County, his fourth criminal arrest so far this year. And polls indicate that he remains far and away the leader of the Republican Party. I think back a couple of years ago when I was one of these big media scrums and I was standing next to a reporter from France, and a soundbite from Donald Trump was played. He watched it, listened to it. After I was done, the guy turned to me and said, I don't understand. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, is this the best the United States can do? Tell me your thoughts about Trump and how likely it is you think he will receive the GOP nomination.
Well, right now, in terms of the likelihood of him receiving the GOP nomination, he's the odds-on favorite if the polls are correct and if the polls hold. I'm a little suspicious of all of this. I think there's much more churning beneath the surface than we can see and we can appreciate right now. And these events, like what took place at the Fulton County Jail, are going to play out and they're going to have an effect over time. They may be a small effect, but they'll still have an effect. There are two questions to ask about the politics around Donald Trump. One, does he win the nomination? It can be the Republican nominee. There he's way out in front. Two, can he win the general election if he's going up against Biden, as everybody anticipates right now? And that's much more problematic, it seems, because there's nothing that's happening to Donald Trump now that wins more people over who are in the middle. The narrow slice of swing voters, if we can call them that, in the key states that really matter. And it doesn't change the narrative that many of his opponents have aimed his way, that he lost re-election, he lost the special election shortly thereafter, the two Senate seats that were up for grabs, and Republicans did poorly in 2022. So I think the politics are very volatile, but overall, the trends are not in his favor. They are for his base, right? Because he can say with this, as he said with others, this is just the latest chapter of the witch hunt. And look at Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, for example. People who are leaders who are under siege can prevail with their determined narrative. But I think it's a very problematic place for him to be. It would be a tough campaign. If you were running it, you wouldn't want that job.
Yeah. Brandon, let me ask you, let's pick up on what Frank was talking about there, because to use some of the terms we've heard from Donald Trump, the witch hunt, trying to weaponize the Department of Justice here in the United States. But a new Politico Ipsos poll suggests that Americans are growing skeptical of Donald Trump's claims that he is the victim in all this, saying that nearly 60% say the federal trial in Trump's 22 election subversion case should take place before the election in 2024. And half of those polled believe Trump is going to go to prison if convicted.
So it's interesting because you're going to have your mega Republicans, but I think the challenge that many conservatives and even independents are saying is, well, wait a minute. They're looking at this case. They're saying, okay, clearly this guy, some are saying that maybe the law was broken in Georgia. Okay, some can accept that. But then the question is, but this president, his son has issues that it seems like the judicial system is clearly ignoring. And so I think the problem that you have is you've got folks on the right saying, okay, I may or may not like Donald Trump, but it seems like the politics is what's moving these decisions, not the judicial system or not a president breaking the law. I think it's clear that no man is above the law. But if that's the case, there's a guy named Hunter Biden right now that seems like he's getting a get out of jail free card. And I think the challenge is if you can't prosecute one and not prosecute the other and make it look fair.
Brandon, I was waiting for the, well, what about argument to come from someone. But, and I hear what you're saying, but without question, somebody who sat as chief executive of the United States and now running for re-election again, don't you think he should be held to the standard everybody else is?
Well, again, I go back to the judicial system. There used to be something called innocent until proven guilty. I think the challenge now is you've got some on the right saying, well, again, where is the conversation on Hunter Biden? I think also what you got to look at, if we want to talk politics, if you look at the amount of funding, the amount of dollars that have come towards the campaign, and this president's poll numbers, it's actually strengthening him whether he gets the nomination or not. And so now when you start to look at the candidates from the other night, some are saying, he is clearly the front runner, and what the media has done and what the press has done and what the judicial system has done is made his brand much stronger. Listen, the worst thing in the world that the Dems want to have is a martyr in Donald Trump, and it's exactly what's happening right now.
Okay. Rena, a new Des Moines Register NBC poll shows that 4 out of 10 caucus goers, and one thing I love about Iowa is how serious the voters of that state really take their job, for lack of a better term. They really focus on the issues. They come out, they hash everything out, and it's something the national media loves to come in and follow and see play out. But more than half of those are still open to moving in another direction, basically finding a GOP candidate who isn't facing 90-some charges against him. So what do you make of this? And what do you make of Trump's very strong lead that he can at least boast about to this date?
Well, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest to see that and hear that there are voters in places like Iowa that want something else, because that is the phrase du jour, looking for something new, in search of something else. I think there are a great many Republican voters out there who are not answering these polls. And frankly, I don't know that we have even any good empirical evidence at this point to show us what the Republican electorate genuinely looks like. What we know from the last midterms is that MAGA is shrinking. The Make America Great Again faction of the party is indeed shrinking, and they are waning in their influence. Now, so where does that leave us? It leaves us in a moment where that debate that took place this past week in Milwaukee looked pretty good to most folks. Many people went in there with a preconceived notion thinking, is this another audition for vice president for Trump? But I think what we heard, because Trump wasn't there, was a whole lot more substance. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of jabs and punches landed too, particularly by former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. But Pence and Ramaswamy, my gosh, they could not let up. That was really hard to watch for me, because I thought, when are they going to stop?
Right.
We're going to hear from more folks. Governor Chris Christie did get a lot of talk time, but he wasn't quite the intellectual bully that many of us expected. So who have people got to pick from when it comes to the next Republican nominee to take over the White House? I think Vivek Ramaswamy is looking really good. It's been talked about, that surge of his, essentially in polls only in recent weeks. What does that also indicate? It indicates that there could be a Trump 2.0, and Ramaswamy thinks he may be it. Now, here we sit in the moment in which we have now seen a mugshot of the former president of the United States. And I think that's hitting the consciousness of many Republican women in particular. Now, let's not forget, Republican women are practical, reasonable, collected about all this. And I think what they really saw is it's frankly, this is it now. This is a moment in which we can say this man has done the crime. He's not been found guilty. He is indicted. But it is time to perhaps divorce ourselves of this weight that we don't need to carry into the next year. And that is what I think a lot of Republican women are whispering about right now, and it'll carry into the next year.
Gerald, I want to go back to what's going to unfold in Fulton County, Georgia, moving forward, because at least one of the defendants, well, we know one of the defendants has already filed a measure asking for a speedy trial, and now it appears he's going to be in court on October 23rd. That's just a couple of months from now. The DA, Fonnie Willis, is going to ask the judge for all 19 defendants on that date, but virtually no one expects that to happen, and even trying 19 people at one time, although in the spirit of full disclosure, I should say I was in Atlanta last week, and you and I chatted somewhat at length about this, and you think it can happen. Explain to me why you think it can happen, and is there an advantage for Trump if some of these other individuals go to trial first, and then he can play perhaps a different hand moving on into March?
Yes, and so, one of the defendants has already filed a demand for speedy trial. And in Georgia, when you file a demand for speedy trial and there's not a severance, then everyone goes to trial. And so there's quite a strong possibility that on the 23rd, the judge will call everyone in and start to move the case forward and potentially actually try it. Because if the case is not tried within that term of court or the next subsequent term of court under Georgia law, when there's a speedy trial demand, then the case will be dismissed. So this could move very quickly for all defendants. And I think for the former president who's trying to delay, he would have to move for a severance to get an opportunity to see what the state's case is and how he can defend it. It would be good for him to move for a severance. That way he could see DA Willis lay out her strategy as she goes after Mr. Chesbrough or any of the others that try to go forward, like Sidney Powell.
Right.
But they need to understand that she's been preparing for this for 2 years. She had an independent special grand jury that investigated it. She has all the discovery. She's ready to go. So I think it would be a disservice to him and others to try to speed this along. And even for the president, who has 3 other cases that he has to defend, which already have trial dates that are set, of course, in the hush money case, and then in the documents case, and then, of course, in the big case, the election interference case in D.C., you have all these cases moving forward. But I think that the smart attorney would counsel their clients to actually get the discovery before you demand a speedy trial, because the state is ready. And trust me, Ms. Willis is very seasoned in RICO cases.
Right.
She's tried Georgia's longest RICO case. She has another RICO case that's pending right now. Trust me, she's ready to go.
And real quickly, Gerald, before I move on to a different topic, you're somebody who went up against Fani Willis in a RICO case. How did that work out?
Yeah, so I tried Georgia's longest trial, the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal trial, which was a RICO case. We were unsuccessful. We lost to Ms. Willis, but ultimately my client was later exonerated. But what I'm saying is that Mr. Trump needs to understand that Georgia justice is a little bit different than everywhere else. You know, many places said he wouldn't be arrested. They say it wouldn't be mugshot, say he wouldn't have to do a perp walk. He did all those things in Georgia. And so what he needs to understand is his most serious peril is in Georgia and potentially going to a Georgia prison. Of course, he is presumed innocent.
Absolutely.
He has great lawyers in Steve Sadow, but he needs to be prepared for what's happening in Georgia.
Okay, switching gears a bit. 8 of Donald Trump's rivals for the Republican presidential nomination, of course, as we mentioned, duked it out Wednesday night on stage during a debate in Wisconsin. The former president and clear leader was not in the field. Now, CGTN's Henrik Sabrandi has more in this report on what unfolded on Wednesday.
At the very place where the 2024 Republican National Convention will take place 11 months from now, the GOP faithful got a first group look at some of the candidates vying to take on President Joe Biden later next year. Sparks flew at times during the 2-hour debate.
I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
Hold on. I've had enough. I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here.
The 8 candidates differed on issues like a national abortion ban.
And can't we all agree that we are not going to put a woman in jail or give her the death penalty if she gets an abortion?
Some painted a dark picture of an America in trouble.
This decline is not inevitable. It's a choice. We need to send Joe Biden back to his basement and reverse American decline.
And some fired back at first-time political candidate Vivek Ramaswamy after his comments about illegal immigration and Ukraine.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you would not support an increase of funding to Ukraine?
I would not. And I think that this is disastrous, that we are protecting against an invasion across somebody else's border when we should use those same military resources to prevent across the invasion of our own southern border here in the United States.
Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience.
You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what?
Only when the debate was half over did the moderators bring up the so-called elephant in the room, the now 4 times indicted former President Donald Trump, the clear Republican frontrunner who opted not to be in Milwaukee.
If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would.
Some said that's a problem for the Republican Party.
3/4 of Americans don't want a rematch between Trump and Biden. And we have to face the fact that Trump is the most disliked politician in America. We can't win a general election that way.
Someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct, okay? The conduct is beneath the office of President of the United States.
Former Vice President Mike Pence touted his decision, controversial within the party, to certify the 2020 election for Biden.
Mike did his duty. I got no beef with him, but here's the thing. Is this what we're going to be focusing on going forward?
That remains to be seen. Many of Trump's political rivals remain reluctant to directly criticize him. It's not clear whether he'll be part of the second Republican debate next month in California. Henrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Milwaukee.
Well, Frank, you have hosted, you have covered your share of nationally televised debates on something like this. And when you see the highlights, boy, it really brings back the haymakers, these people pulling back and unwinding. Obviously, Trump not being there does create a vacuum, but look at the way the candidates kind of try to move in and take the limelight. I would like to know what you think about Ramaswamy, his performance there as well. And what's your big takeaway from the first debate?
Well, my big takeaway was actually the soundbite of the night goes to DeSantis, who said, is this what we're going to be focusing on? And practically pleading, begging to focus on other things. As long as Donald Trump is out there, they are all in the shadows. Doesn't matter how many times they debate or what they say. Trump, I'm looking at some of my most recent polls, he's got a 44-point lead on the closest contender in some of these polls within the Republican Party. Ramaswamy is trying for the Trump 2.0 vote, and he would get it because that's the kind of red meat that he's serving up. Nikki Haley, who in those same polls is in low single digits, I think turned in the most substantive performance and the most unexpected performance when she spoke about abortion and when she took on Ramaswamy on the subject of Ukraine and foreign policy. Ron DeSantis was there and really didn't look to me like he could figure out how he's trying to position himself and break out his campaign. He was supposed to be the great threat to Donald Trump. Not only has that not materialized, DeSantis has lost ground. The question for all of these candidates now is, how do they distinguish themselves? How do they break from Trump while trying to project a vision for the future to break this stranglehold that Donald Trump has on the Republican base? And it's miserably difficult. The debate was very interesting. It was an opening round. But if anybody thought they were going to reframe the issue and the moment from that debate, it didn't happen.
Okay. Brandon, let's pick up on one of the hot topics, because during the midterm election recently, everybody was waiting for this red wave that simply did not appear. And a lot of people blame the fact that the GOP did focus largely, to a large degree, on the abortion rights issue. I'd like you to listen to what Governor Nikki Haley of South Carolina and Mike Pence had to say about this issue.
Can't we have a minimum standard in every state in the nation that says when a baby is capable of feeling pain, an abortion cannot be allowed? A 15-week ban is an idea whose time has come. It's supported by 70% of the American people.
When you're talking about a federal ban, be honest with the American people. We haven't had 45 pro-life senators in over 100 years, so no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president could ban all those state laws. Don't make women feel like they have to decide on this issue when you know we don't have 60 Senate votes in the House.
70% of the American people support legislation to ban abortion after a baby is capable of experiencing.
Okay, let's pick up on that, Brandon, and I want to get your thoughts.
You know, it's interesting. I think of the night, if I had to pick winners and losers, Nikki Haley definitely prevailed last night. The challenge with the abortion issue, I think, is one of the challenges with Republicans is you don't often hear women talking about the issue as much as you hear men talking about the issue. And I think what Nikki Haley did the other night is she held a position, but she also separated the politics from the realities of what's actually happening when it comes to abortion laws. I can tell you this, the one thing that really showed last night is that Nikki Haley definitely not only was ready for prime time, but she also is willing to talk about those sensitive issues that other elected officials, politicians like former Vice President Pence refused to address, and it showed last night.
Okay, Rena, I want your thoughts on that, because a couple of things stand out. One, calling it a sensitive issue. I think a lot of it would call it a very core issue in the upcoming election, not a sensitive issue. And secondly, the fact that, as Brandon said, that men are talking about it more than women. Is that true?
Well, abortion can be both a core issue and a sensitive issue. This is about bodily autonomy we're talking about here. And I've come to see it through the lens of democracy. If women do not have bodily autonomy, then are they even full citizens in a representative democracy like ours? I don't think so. I mean, to be honest here, look, I have my private views about the issue of abortion, but I believe in choice for other women, because that is how this country works. On stage at that debate, I heard Mike Pence not show an ability to separate church and state, and that is enshrined in our Constitution. He and Senator Tim Scott were, my gosh, so far right in some of their remarks. And what, in contrast, Nikki Haley showed she's ready to take on a general election. She understands the assignment, and that is to remove Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from the White House. So what she was essentially trying to do is appeal to the Republicans now. And yes, we are in primary mode right now for the Republicans. But what I will say is that she showed that you've got to be able to do all these things at the same time. So to rip on Republicans during the segment on Bidenomics on that question, it was the first question of the night at that debate. That was masterful of her. Of course, on abortion, as we just talked about, that ability to say,
okay,
we can't do this to American women, that's important. And thirdly, on Putin, she was able to show that was also an area in which she can excel. And we need to beat Putin. And that is why we have Ukraine back. So again, this was Nikki Haley showing she understands that there is one goal here, and that is to beat Biden and the Democrats in 2024.
Okay. Gerald, when we were talking last week, we were talking about African-American voters, and they are going to be key in this upcoming race if the Democrats hope to win. Joe Biden promised African-Americans a lot of things leading up to the 2020 race. Your thoughts where the issue is now, and how frustrated do you think that many black voters are?
I think African-American voters are frustrated with both parties. You know, I listened to the debate in Milwaukee, and none of that applied to black individuals or anyone who's going to carry this electorate. And people need to remember that African-Americans have chosen the last 3 presidents. And so to hear this red meat being thrown out by Mr. Vashami or Tim Scott or others and not dealing with those core issues. And of course, for the president of the United States, not addressing the core issues. African-Americans want to see the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. They want to see the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. They want to see student debt be ended and repaid. And those issues are core to African Americans. And then there is the elephant in the room with Ron DeSantis trying to erase Black history and to get rid of what is core to our American democracy, and that's voting rights. And so I think that anybody that's running for president does not need to discount the African-American vote, because they will decide who is in the White House in 2024. And I think that all candidates should focus keenly on those issues to their own peril if they don't.
Okay. Frank, it's unfair. Maybe you have 30 seconds. Tell me what you thought when Brett Baer asked, can you support Donald Trump for president if he's convicted?
I thought that was the most effective and the most awkward moment of the debate. And it showed the quandary that these candidates are in, because they know they need to raise their hand to play to the party, to play to the base, and to continue to be the Republicans, because that's part of the thing that comes from the Republican National Committee. You got to support the candidate. But they also know all the baggage that carries and how they're trying to break with the past and focus on the future. This is a very awkward place and a very awkward time to be a candidate within the party, what's left of this party, running against Donald Trump.
Okay. I want to thank all of our guests. Frank, especially, I got to give a shout out to you up in Boston for the birth of your second grandchild. And from one grandfather to another, congratulations. Again, thanks
this is
all.
why we do it. Thank you.
Okay. That does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Caleb's here in Washington, D.C. As always, thanks for watching.